I'm Tyler. Welcome to Duluth Junction Workshop. This is my 1973 Saab Sonett 3, and I'm happy to say that it is officially a real car now. I picked this up and got it running in the fall of 2020. And I've been working for about a year to make sure that it is ready to go on the road and act as a real, reliable form of transportation. I'm happy to say that we are currently 350 miles from home in the Michigan's Upper Peninsula. This car made it here, and we are volunteering at the Lake Superior Performance Rally 2021. The drive went pretty well, and it was pretty uneventful, but there were a few things that popped up. On the way up, it started running pretty crappy up in northern Wisconsin, and by the time we got over to the hotel at night, this thing was running pretty rough. And we found out after a lot of frustration and misdiagnosis in Hancock, that actually the points had loosened themselves up over the drive. I had actually installed them only a few hundred miles ago, and I did not think in my wildest dreams that they would be an issue so soon. Points 16 now. What the fuck, man? That was the biggest thing that I dealt with so far in this trip, and I think next time I'm gonna Loctite that screw down so it doesn't back itself out. Another thing that we had to deal with was the exhaust. Now, I did my best with the exhaust, but I really didn't have much time to perfect it. I made it a little bit too low. Unfortunately, we were running down the Herman Astoria stage on the way out from a waterfall. it was grabbing these exhaust clamps on the road on the high points and hitting rocks, and those rocks actually pounded the exhaust right off the car. We got the muffler hanging off by the rear hanger, and everything else was dragging on the ground. So I had to get out of the car. We had to, my dad's with me on this trip, we had to jack it up a little bit and reconnect that stuff a couple times. Just didn't work. We were able to put it back together, pound it in, and really torque down those clamps at the Sidna worker pickup point, and it runs really well now with the exhaust. It's actually quieter than it was on the way up, so I'm happy about that. But let's talk about some of the issues that I had with this car on the past year, and all the things that I would do differently if I had done this again, and the next time I do a revival, what I would fix next time. Gotta get this little film set done quick. The biggest thing that I had trouble with this car in the last year was fuel. And you might remember the fuel tank I took out of it was full of varnish. It was super gross and smelled disgusting. I swapped in a cleaner tank that still had a little varnish, and I thought it was gonna be okay with some carb cleaner in it. It wasn't. The varnish actually made its way into the valve guides. It stuck a valve down. It messed up my rocker assembly, and that was a big issue to go through, and I got the heads redone at the same time. That cost several $100s that I really didn't need to spend. Later on, I had fuel sediment issues, and I have replaced filters maybe 5 or 6 times at this point, trying to get the rust particles out of the fuel. The rust particles were possibly even almost as big of a deal as the varnish, because they go in the carburetor and gunk that up, and then it won't flow fuel. And I broke down a couple times, had to get dragged home because of the rust issues. That's that steady throttle. After all, what I did is I just pulled the tank out a couple weeks ago, and I restored the fuel tank with a KBS 3-part fuel tank restorer kit. It's kind of like a POR 15 setup, and then you do the zinc phosphate coating, and then the last time is that paint-like coating on the inside of the fuel tank. Gives it a nice chemical resistant barrier that will hold that fuel in and have it nice and clean in there. I was able to throw that thing in pretty close, about a week before we left for LSPR here, and I'm very glad that it worked perfectly. Everything seems to be fine, and there was just a little bit of rust particles in the rest of the fuel system, even after I blew it out, that made its way into another filter, but it's running pretty well right now. One of the red herrings that I dealt with for a long time was ignition issues, and I know I had to replace the Poinson condenser and stuff like that, and I built new wires for it, and I put new plugs in, but a lot of that was just due to fuel, I think. And it's not bad to go and restore the ignition system, but I think if I would have restored that tank before I got it running the first time, it would have been a huge weight off my back, and it would have prevented a lot of issues that I ran into. I know a lot of people run boat tanks in cars for a while. I didn't have a boat tank, and I still don't, and I was just trying to get it on the road a little bit. It didn't work out. Just go restore the tank. It takes like a week and a half. With the dry time and everything, you get it back in the car and it's done. With the fluid changes, I also, I changed the fluids a lot, and I got a lot of gunk out of the engine. Didn't turn out to be an issue, but it did take a few oil changes, probably 3 or 4, to get the stuff out of there. The transmission, I changed the oil on that a few times too, and I did get a bunch of stuff out, but it turned out that a bunch of the stuff was metal shavings. I talked to a transmission expert, Tom Donnie, and he basically said, you know what, if there's damage in there, you probably just flushed it out and there's just damage now, and just run it and see what happens. So that's what I did. I just took this thing out and I drove it 350 miles. I knew the fuel system was working pretty well, and it made it here. One thing we had to I shouldn't say we only had a couple issues, because we did have to stop at CarQuest, and I threw a timing light on this. Now, I had to advance the timing really far ahead to get the fuel system to work out before I had the fuel system restored. I was able to set it back to factory initial timing of about 6 to 8 degrees before we left, but I had to adjust that again by the time we got up here, because it had backed itself off a little bit and it was losing a little power. That's okay, that's not a big deal, but I'm glad I brought my tools. Two things that never worked with this car were tachometer and speedometer. I got a used speedometer cable, and I actually swapped over a tach. They both work now, so that's super useful for going on the road. It turned out that with the weird style car this is, that the tires turned out to be a way bigger issue to source than I expected. I originally got 155 SR15 tires, which are essentially an 80 profile, and they were a Redstein Sprint Classic. They're really nice tires, but they're summer tires. I didn't realize that. So they're not supposed to go below 40 degrees. I decided for LSPR, it's in the 30s, it's in the 40s, it's raining, and sometimes we get a little snowy here. So I got some snow tires. These are Winter Force 2s, and they are 175, 65, 15. If you run 185 65s, I've read that they actually rub on the rear fenders. Now let me show you. We do have a little bit of stuff in the back, but there's not a lot of clearance. That's just kind of touching my finger there. Not a lot of clearance in the rear fender. So if you have a Sonett and you're looking for tires, it can be a little bit of a challenge to find ones that fit properly. But I got them on, and they grip the dirt pretty well. I'm pretty happy with them so far, and they've run very beautifully along with the car all the way up here. So glad to have this thing being a reliable car finally, and having that fuel system set up was such a relief. Now, the thing that we have to deal with now is the headlights are kind of fidgety. Sometimes you pop them up and they don't turn on. Well, it's most of the time they don't turn on. And then when they do, the hinge is kind of messed up, so the one lays a little lower. The gauge lights don't work. The fan inside isn't quite blowing where we want it to. And there's a bunch of other little things that you don't think about when you're getting a car back on the road, but they really do come into their own, and you notice them when you're out trying to do a road trip and get out. Rally doesn't stop when it rains. It's raining right now. It's like 45 degrees, and whatever happens, you need to get out of the stage, drive on some dirt roads, sometimes a little bit quickly, and you need stuff to work. So it works well enough right now to get around, but we got more work to do. So stay tuned. We can also go over some other things. If you have any other questions about Saab stuff or revivals, shoot me a question down in the comments. I will try to come back if there are a few questions, and I'd love to talk with you about what's going on. We also have the F600, which, feel free to drop questions about that or whatever as well. But thank you so much for coming. I'll show you some rally cars here, and I'll see you next time. Press on.